Hi, it's Mona. Today I'm making a sweet summer card with the new Make Lemonade stem set. I'm also bringing in a few little images from critters in the jungle and on the beach because I want to build a lovely summer scene. I start with stamping. I'm using lawnfawn jet black ink on white cardstock. I usually stamp my images twice because it gives me a nice crisp black outline. After I stamp the main images, I move things around and stamp a few extra lemons, leaves, and little details. I may not use every single image on this card, but I like having options when I start building the scene. Once my paper is full, I heat set the ink with my heat gun. This helps everything dry properly before coloring. Now let's start with the lemons and anything yellow. I'm using a darker, slightly orange-yellow shade first. I add a little line and a few dots where I want the deepest color. Then I bring in a lighter yellow and blend it into the darker shade. I also use this color on the darker parts of the lemonade. After that, I finish my lightest yellow mostly on the lemonade and on a few parts of the lemons. I leave some tiny white edges on purpose. These little white spots make the lemon look shiny and fresh. Next, I color the wooden lemonade stand. I want a washed wood look, not a super warm brown, so I choose soft faded wood tones with a little yellow feeling in them. With my darkest wood shade, I add small uneven lines. I don't worry too much about perfect shadows, I just add them here and there in a random way. When I go over some of those lines with my second shade, I still leave a few white spaces because the goal is to create a little wood pattern. Oops, here I made a small marker mistake, but that's okay. I usually fix mistakes in two steps. First, I go over the area with a colorless blender. It doesn't remove everything, but it softens the color. Later, when the rest is colored, you can barely notice it. And the second trick is a highlight. Then I use my lightest wood shade to soften a few more areas. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. A little texture and pattern is enough to make it look cute. I also add the base color to the stars and the little snail shell. This is not their final color yet, I just want to give them a starting layer. Now let's move on to the greens. I turn my paper upside down because these leaves will hang down on the card. It is easier for me to color them from that direction. I start with a medium dark green. It is a little cool and muted, and I use small V-shaped strokes on each leaf. I also color the tiny green parts of the lemons with the same shade. Next, I add the lighter yellow-green. I touch it into about half of the darker area so the two colors blend a little. I still try to leave space for the lightest shade. Then I finish the leaves with my lightest yellow-green. This gives them a fresh lemony look. Because I want the leaves to have a deep color, I go back with an even darker green. I redraw some of the little V shapes and I add tiny dots with stippling motion. This step is optional, but I love how much interest it adds. After the first layer dries, I add a few more dark green strokes and dots to deepen the leaves even more. Next, I color this tiny shell just for fun. I think it will add the sweet little summer detail to the card. For the glasses, I use a soft turquoise shade. I also go lightly over the lemonade glass with this color. Now it's time for the little mice. I Imagine them in a warm brown color, kind of like Jerry from Tom and Jerry. I loved that cartoon when I was little, so this color combo makes me smile. I start with a simple base color, then I add the next shade and blend over the previous layer. Because these images are tiny and my markers are quite juicy, I barely touch the paper. I use small stippling motions instead of big strokes. Then I use a peachy shade for their cheeks. The belly looks a little flat, so I add some shading around the edge with my middle shade. Once the base is done, I add a few dots with my darkest shade. I love this kind of detail, especially on tiny critters. Then I go back with the lightest shade and blend it all together. Next, I add the soft shadow to the lemonade sign. I use a very light cool gray in the corners and then I soften it with the colorless blender. I also finish the stars. I choose one side of the shadow and add a little medium brown. Then I go over the star with the same yellow shade I used for the lemons. So the stars stay mostly yellow and some get a little bit more brown for extra depth. Now comes one of my favorite parts, highlights. Before I start, I like to touch the pen to my skin for a second. For some reason, it usually helps the white pen flow more smoothly, and I'm using a white Jerry Roll pen in size 10. I add little highlights wherever I feel they look nice. Honestly, it is quite random. And if you ever feel unsure about where to place highlights, I get it. Highlights can feel a little intimidating, but in stamping and card making, I don't think there is really a wrong place for a highlight. Even if you place one and later think, maybe not there, it still adds something. And you learn from it. Next time, you know what you want to try differently. I'm coloring the straw with stripes. It's a tiny risk, but why not? If it works, great. If not, it's only a small detail. And I think it looks cuter this way. After the coloring is finished, I do the die cutting off camera. Aren't these little mice so adorable with the summer images? Now that the images are ready and die cut, it's time to build the rest of the card. For the main scene, I die cut a scalloped rectangle frame from white cardstock. This will frame the tiny summer scene in the middle of the card. Then I mark the inside area with a pencil, just by eye, so I know where to cut my background piece. For the background, I use distress oxide inks in tumbled glass and antique linen colors. I just pull the ink pad over the cardstock and then I blend them together a little bit. It doesn't need to be super smooth because most of it will be covered by the scene. I just want a soft summer background behind the images. I dry it a little with my heat gun so it is easier to work with it. And then I add glue to the four sides of the scalloped frame and just push it gently because I want it to stay in place, but I still need a little room to tuck some images underneath. If you have watched my tutorials before, you probably know that I love foam squares, but for this card, I give myself a little challenge. I try to make the card mostly flat. This makes the card easier and cheaper to mail. And I also want to see if I can still create dimension without lifting every image with foam squares. After I glue down all the small pieces, I close the frame all the way around. Now I still need to choose the final pattern paper for the card front. The yellow one looks really fun, the blue one feels calm, and the purple one makes the yellow lemons pop. The colorful one is also beautiful, but it takes a little too much attention now. In the end, I chose the blue pattern paper. It gives the card a soft, clean summer feeling. I decided to go with this one. So I die cut with a large stitched rectangle die and add it to a classic 5.5 by 4.25 inch card base. And I realized I almost forgot the sentiment. So I stamped the wishing you a zest day sentiment on black cardstock and heat emboss it with white embossing powder. Then I trim it into a small sentiment strip. I place it on the card front, and it works really well with the little lemonade scene. To finish the card, I just put everything together with the sentiment in place. And here is the final card. I hope you have enjoyed this sweet summer project. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye!